Major funding for these programs is made possible by grants from Chase Commercial Term Lending and Capital One Bank, New York Community Bank, the Witkoff Group, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Genova Burns, Jean Tomasi and Webster, Greenberg Traurig, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Friedman, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, Hap Investment Developers, Herrick Feinstein, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman USRealty.com, John Katsimides, Red Apple Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, New Banks, People's United Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling & Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the CUNY TV Foundation, the Continuum Company, Urban American, and these friends.
The real estate market in New York is on fire. It's on fire and it's doing great. So who's getting involved with this? What's happening with it? So today I invited four very young, one over 30, young guys to provide their insight on emerging leaders talking about the real estate world. Today I have Stephen Winter, who is with the Related Companies, Spencer Pariser, who's with Taconic Investment Partners, Andrew Weiner, who's with L&L Holdings, and Michael Rudin, who is with the Rudin Management Company. So, okay, you're a Sacred Heart. You went to Sacred Heart. You graduated from Georgetown.
GW.
GW, I knew it was in Washington over here. Delaware over here, and University of Colorado Boulder. How do you see the real estate? Because you're at one of the best times of real estate. You know, we were talking before that Spencer started at SL Green just right when the world was getting better. How do you see it? I mean, you haven't seen the bad times. I mean, how good is it, Mr. Weiner?
As being the oldest person here, besides you, of course.
No, I'm much younger than you.
You know, I came in 2005, and I was so green that during the peak, I was just learning. And then when I figured out how to tie my shoelaces, the market just crashed. And so I saw the market from its absolute bottom. Low rents, huge concessions, space sitting empty for years at a time. And so it's interesting now to see the uptrend. And you know, there's a lot of exuberance and there's a lot to be proud of what's happening in the market. But people who come from that time period, and people who've been around for a while now, are using this boom with bated breath and trying not to leverage themselves too much. But in this business, you're absolutely optimistic of what's happening.
See, but Michael's family has seen ups, downs, so they've been experienced it, okay? And so has Spencer's family have seen the ups and downs. How does Rudin, who's one of the premier families in the business, how do you, your dad, and your sister, and the rest of the family see the market today?
Well, as Andrew said, it's just incredible. I mean, we're working on a residential project right now in Greenwich Village, and if you told us 8 years ago when we started working on it that we'd be selling for over $3,000 a foot, we would have said you're crazy. But you know, the residential market in a lot of parts of the city, you know, Greenwich Village, West Village, Chelsea, you know, even the Lower East Side is
See,
now.
but one time people wanted to be on the Upper East Side. You know, the Upper East Side was a neighborhood. Who wants to be on the Upper East Side? That's the low-cost alternative today, right?
Yeah, it's, you know,
I live there.
it's, you know, I grew up on the Upper East Side. I think it's still, you know, a great neighborhood. But, you know, for a variety of reasons, my wife and I, you know, we live downtown. A lot of younger people are living downtown. But, you know, you even have, you know, people in their 40s, 50s, 60s who have lived most of their lives, you know, uptown.
I mean, all of you are looking at different opportunities. You're with the, as we would proverbially say, the 850-pound gorilla related, who has a variety of residential, office, and retail. Over here, are there opportunities? Do you guys look at other opportunities? Do you think there's opportunities in different parts besides Manhattan today?
I think there's always opportunities. You know, I specifically just am 100% focused on the condo interest that we just bought back at Time Warner Center.
But also
and
Hudson
Hudson
Yards.
of course, where I spend the majority of my time. But look, I think, you know, Spencer and the folks in his investment group are always looking at new deals in sort of the tertiary markets. You know, everything at Watchtower Heights and Dumbo. I mean, there's just an
I
incredible.
mean, they're
amount
in the
of momentum.
Bronx, you know, the bank building, you know, they went there over there. It was a good market, and that section is becoming the hub over there, you know, 2nd and 3rd Avenue. It's a good situation. I think if you're near subways, I think the real key today is transit-oriented. I did a show on transit-oriented development in New Jersey. That's what helps New Jersey, if you're near transit orientation. And I think that's why, as we were talking about some of the properties that you have and that L&L has, you know, Lower Manhattan is really, has come, people, Lower Manhattan was the low-cost alternative, like the Upper East Side today. But today, it's a different world, right?
Yeah.
Look at the. Go ahead.
We're seeing rents at two properties, 222 Broadway and 195, that are directly across from the Fulton Street Transit Hub, which has every major subway line in New York City connecting to it. And we're seeing rents in the 50s there, where 5 years ago you were talking about 30s. So that market, you know, was up 50% from where it was 5 years ago, and it's a lot has to do with the location and just the demographics of where people are living. In Brooklyn and New Jersey, it's a closer commute to Midtown, but it's the infrastructure that's built, and that plays a huge part of it.
You know, which relates, you know, you have the Lower Manhattan market, and you brought up before the West Village, what you're doing over there, which is a fantastic property, and no one projected what the sale prices would be. Let's talk about the meatpacking district. That you know, Taconic was, you know, visionary over there. They 111 8th Avenue. I mean, when they took over the Port Authority building, it was a disgusting building. It hadn't been touched on for 30 years. Okay, as we said, 8th Avenue was fine. 9th Avenue was a little dangerous. Look what's happening. Samsung, other examples.
Yeah, so we built 837, one of the only spec office buildings at the time with 51 Astor, you know, coming out of the ground downtown, and we signed Samsung, I think about a week ago, at sort of the high water mark. But again, you know, that's market, that, you know, we're giving the tenant sort of exactly what they wanted, and they're going to build a suit, and it's just a fantastic deal for the district. For the neighborhood. You have the Whitney coming in, opening up soon, which is supposed to be bringing 1 million visitors a year there. So that'll really open up sort of the retail
But you know, in the same
streetscape.
manner, you have Hell's Kitchen. You're doing right now a residential. You have an office building in Hell's Kitchen, and you have, I mean, you brought the car dealership over there, and now you're building the 8020, right?
So yeah, so the Movie Lab building on 619 West 54th, we talked about briefly earlier. 54th between 11th and 12th, which is, you know, we bought that in our fund, which is one of our investment vehicles in partnership with NICERS. And then 52nd Street, we're building, we're going to be breaking ground at the end of the year on a 400,000 square foot 8020. And again, with Mercedes House, you know, the public transportation, it's a little far, but it's a cheaper alternative to a lot of you know, other you know, locations. If you talk about, you see the Rudin portfolio and West Village and the rentals. So again, it's a working class sort of young 20s neighborhood, and we like it. There's life.
What about the Hudson Yards? I mean, Related is the major developer in Hudson Yards. You have Brookfield over there. You have Tishman, who just recently bought nearby. But Related is the only one who really is in the ground with a building with tenants. Okay, there's discussion. What type of people are going out there? People can go to a Rudin building or an L&L building in Lower Manhattan. They don't need all this large space. They don't need to have 250,000 square feet. Do you see smaller tenants coming to the Hudson Yards?
Yeah, we certainly have a smaller tenant leasing program that we're actively working on. We've actually met with 60 different tenants across all industry sectors since January of this year. And I think what's really drawing them to the neighborhoods is exactly what Spencer just said. Companies are trying to retain talent. There's a war on talent going on in New York City right now. 50% of the workforce by the time we deliver the first building in 2015, will be millennials. By the time we're finished with the Hudson Yards project in 2025, 75% of the workforce will be millennials. And they want to work in innovative places where the culture has just dramatically shifted. So obviously on top of that, there's the fact that this is all new product. It's new construction, right? Over the last 20 years, 10% of the inventory that's been added to the overall product has been new. Whereas in London and Hong Kong, they've added 40% and 60% of new product in those markets. And the transportation is what's also attracting these smaller tenants. I mean, the city's completely transformed the West Side with the 7 extension. We're now 3 stops from Grand Central. We're 2 blocks from Penn Station. We're right near the ferry terminal. We're within close proximity to the West Side Highway, to the Lincoln Tunnel.
City Bike.
City Bike, and for guys like Andrew, we're right near the heliport. I mean, and that only sort of is on the surface of what makes the West Side great.
He liked Chelsea, so he can practice his golf shot.
That's right.
Yeah,
but you hit on something that's really important that not a lot of people talk about, but is the recruiting aspect of this. And at 114 Fifth Avenue, which is our redevelopment of a 350,000 square foot building, much like we did at 205th, basically delivering a brand new building inside a 100-year-old shell, a big piece of that is our rooftop amenity. And a big part of our pitch, besides delivering new product, that's not necessarily ground up, but a complete redevelopment, is that companies who are coming to that part of the neighborhood, who are mature companies, are looking towards attracting the best of breed. And those tenants want to work in Silicon Alley. They want to work in new construction product. They want to work close to transportation, close to where they live. And that's a huge selling point. I think employers are really focusing on that with their real estate. It's not just, I need 4, walls and a roof. It's how am I going to, push my business in the 21st century.
One of the things that Rudin, did, I think it was in the late 90s, one of the other recessions, was on Broad Street, on 55 Broad. I mean, it became a tech. Talk about what you do.
Yeah, well, it was the mid-90s. There was, I think, about 30 million square feet of vacant space in Lower Manhattan. We had an entirely vacant building for a couple of years, and my father and our chief operating officer, John Gilbert, read a book about wired buildings. And so we had this opportunity, a blank canvas, which you don't get very often. And we wired the whole building. We put in carrier-neutral risers, and we created really the first fully wired, tech building, in the world probably. And that, started a trend, of providing easy access, and obviously the internet, since that time has, proliferated in a way that people could never have imagined, and everybody wants to be connected, and it goes back to being able to attract these these people who are going to work for your company, and being able to give them access to the things that they want. So it's you see it in buildings, any new building that goes up now has that technology as part of the the infrastructure, and a lot of landlords are now trying to figure out ways to put that type of infrastructure into older buildings.
What about the space that's going to be available when Time Warner moves to the Hudson Yards, the 1.1 million square feet at the Time Warner Center?
Look, it's an incredible block. We're just sort of in the middle of launching the product. As you said, it's about 1 million square feet. We're looking at rents well north of $100 a foot. We really think it's a building that's going to compete with 9 West 57th Street and the General Motors building, just given the proximity to the park. It's literally, other than a building we're delivering at Hudson Yards, which will open up to Hudson Park and Boulevard, it's one of the only buildings in the city that literally sits right on top of a park. So we're incredibly excited about that.
What else? What else is Rudin doing these days besides?
You know, we mentioned it before, looking at, you know, the outer boroughs. We're starting to look at, you know, both residential and commercial projects in Brooklyn. You know, a major part of our business is reinvesting in our existing portfolio. We just are completing a almost $90 million renovation project on our largest residential building on the Upper East Side, where we did a full facade restoration, redoing the lobby, the driveway. We added a gym, redid the laundry room.
Looks like a completely brand new building.
Yeah,
I mean,
you know, we had a
you-
unique opportunity. There are a lot of white brick buildings in the city. Fortunately, we weren't in a landmark district, so we had the option to either replace it with the white brick or go with a new type of facade system, and we decided to go with the new system, and we think it looks, you know, incredible. And you know, we thought, you know, it's obviously doing a project like that is a big burden, especially on the tenants in the building. We thought we would lose a lot of tenants throughout the, you know, it was about a 4-year process, but, you know, most of them stuck with us and are now, you know, very, you know, excited about, you know, essentially a new building that they're living in.
you know, there was the resurrection of Harlem. Then it was quiet. Do you see Harlem as opportunities? I mean, related, you know, had a substantial, not at Harlem, at the outskirts of Harlem, 96th Street. They owned a lot of residential buildings over there.
We've looked at some stuff on 125th Street. I think the retail landscape there is changing dramatically, but we're not all that active in Harlem right now. We're focusing mostly on Brooklyn, Gowanus, wedged in between, you know, Carroll Gardens, Park Slope, Borum Hill. I mean, just the culture, the arts, the young people, you know, want to be there. They're going to clean up the canal. And there's
Have you let Andrew go to Brooklyn? You know, is he allowed to go to Brooklyn?
We could talk about downtown later.
Spencer's going to give me a tour next week.
And and we're looking at some stuff in Williamsburg as well. Although again, pricing is a little frothy. Downtown, we're big believers in, you know, $30 billion of infrastructure investment with the World Trade Center sites opening up. We've looked at 55 Broadway, 65 Broadway, 5 Hanover, 2 Rector, 30 Broad, 80 Broad.
But you know, you're just bringing up, you've looked at these properties, and unfortunately, there's been, it's like going to the wedding. You know, you're courting that bride, and you're ready to make the proposal for marriage. And unfortunately, the bride says, oh, there's another person who's going to give me a bigger ring. Okay, I mean, in a different manner, you know.
It's a testament to our discipline. You have to go through the exercise, go through the routine. Especially us young guys, we're learning, right? So, you know, for me on the investment side, I'm underwriting these deals. I'm starting to understand and learn the markets, and the fundamentals are there in downtown because of everything, you know, Andrew and Stephen had mentioned. So we'll continue looking at investments, and, you know, I think for Taconic, at least, we're working on a lot of legacy deals. We recapped 401 West 14th, which is the site of the Apple store, and we talked about 52nd Street. We're assembling something on the Upper East Side, which is keeping our team busy. We have the Lower East Side, base of the Williamsburg Bridge, Essex Crossing. So we don't need to do 7 deals a year, and we could be very selective.
Here's the question. I mean, as we said, Andrew's the old man. He's the only one over 30, but, you know, everyone's pretty close. If somebody came to you, some people who are alumni of where you went to college or friends, what would you tell them about getting involved in the real estate business? Why is it interesting to be involved with the real estate business? Because, you know, Stephen said before, you know, in the neighborhood where he grew up, you looked at 2 professions. Real estate wasn't something. Real estate was in your blood and in your blood because of the family, and you were saying before that your grandfather had some involvement in real estate. How do you know, why should somebody get involved? I mean, you were a broker. I mean, let's be realistic. That's a tough business, being a broker. You know, it's a commission.
A fun one too, though.
Right. It's a fun business, but it's, you know, it's difficult. And, you know, you made your mark as a broker. But when one of your friends, you know, they say they want to change their career, what do you tell them to get involved with real estate? I mean, I'm just asking this.
I think one, if you're sort of, you know, a competitive person, the competitive nature is unmatched. I think the fluidity of the marketplace, there's always something going on. There's always deals to follow, deals to track, relationships. I mean, generally, people in our industry are fun. They're energetic. They're interesting. And, you know, you're right. I came from a background where real estate wasn't on my radar until someone told me to go out and make some money, and I found real estate. But I couldn't see myself doing anything else. It's just it's an incredible way to live life.
I completely agree with you. There's a myriad of personalities and characters in this industry, which
Characters is a nice word. Okay.
But if you're personable, if you're outgoing, if you're eccentric, you can be out. I mean, we've known each other for years now. We've become good friends just through the
Right,
industry.
now, didn't you start an organization of young guys?
I did, yes. Emerging
Where's that?
emerging professionals in real estate. Mike's actually a member, and you guys will be invited. We have 3 related guys, soon to be 4 now. And I'm not sure if L&L is a representative, so we're going to need you in.
I'll
Talk
be
to
there.
me about this organization.
So it was my buddy Drew Popkin and I, who works for Mickey Naftali, started the organization about close to a year and a half ago, and it's really just casual, social environment where we're fully funded, so the members don't pay a dime. And we started out with, call it 35 under 30 professionals, all on the investment side, so no brokers, because we could pack the room with hundreds of our friends if that was the case. And it's really just to build a rapport with guys who we have some bankers, some funds, landlords, and it's just so that we can stay on top of what's going on in the market, be able to pick up the phone and call up a friend from Angelo Gordon or from an M&T bank and say, hey, I read about this, what's going on, what can you tell me
Similar
about that market?
to my colleagues at Madison started NIPEN. And NIPEN has really grown. It's the organization that was funds, and a lot of people want to be there and the opportunity. And then Andrew is very involved with a number of charitable organizations. Israel Bonds is a good example of that. I mean, because you meet people.
Yeah, I think going back to your question about how would you advise somebody in real estate why you love it, I love the entrepreneurial side of this business. I like being creative. I like to say to people, I'll never say no. There's always a solution, and sometimes that solution is a monetary one. But I'm fortunate to be in a position overseeing leasing for our business that, you are on the sales side, you're on the creative side, you can touch real estate. You're not just sitting at your desk, you're constantly out of the office. In terms of the organizations you're talking about, it's all about the relationships that you've built. We've known each other for, 5+ years, almost a decade for some of us. And when I first started out, the people who are still around from then are maybe a handful. And now there's that trust that's built, and you only have your reputation. And that gets known in the market. Even though it's a huge industry, it really is a small industry. But I love the entrepreneurial side and the sales side and the development side of just being able to take something that, one person sees it as a horrible building, and another person looks at it and just can imagine what it can be. And you're just reinventing the existing stock that's here.
It's like what Michael was saying. You take a building which was a white brick building, and you've changed the perspective of a neighborhood.
Right.
And then, if you look at, we look at St. Vincent's Hospital, that was nobody had the foresight, okay? St. Vincent's, unfortunately, what happened with the hospital, but, fortunately, LIJ, North Shore LIJ is building the emergency room, and they're going to have some good services over there, and then you have some great residential. You look at the market, what has transpired even just in your short careers over here. There was no meatpacking district. There was a High Line that stood vacant when Related went into Columbus Circle. Nobody wanted to be in Columbus Circle. It was the neighborhood. Who's going to rent space over here? It's out of the beating track, but great subways. But and you're looking at it. When Rudin went to Lower Manhattan, went to different neighborhoods, it was a different type of market, and the city has evolved. And I think the evolving, and with the transportation, and as you brought up the key, and I joke about it, but city bikes and green buildings and other environments really changed the workload.
Yeah.
And people want to go out at night. Why do we have 54.5 million or close to 55 million visitors? Because this is the best city in the world. We may not get the highest rents, but it's a place that people want to come to. People who went to Delaware, people who went to George Washington, your friends want to be in New York City. You know, you went to Colorado. The people from Colorado, they preferred it. A lot of them want to stay in Colorado because it's a great environment. You know, it's a different thing. But look what's happening into Lodo, into sections of Colorado, into Denver, because there's that market over here. So if you had to say, as young real estate leaders, where's the next opportunity in New York? Is it do you see, and you know, we could talk about Taconix involved with Coney Island, but you know, it's not been the market yet. Marine Park would not be the market either, no, for a simple reason, because of the transportation. I think it's a question of timing, of how far people want to live in Manhattan, live and work in the neighborhood, but they also want to have a reasonable commute to their job.
I think you hit the nail on the head that people want to be here. And Brooklyn, the outer boroughs, the suburban markets, in a hot market, that market rises because people are going to look to those markets because they can't necessarily afford New York City.
So you failed to bring out that you do. L&L owns a building in New Jersey. I realize, you know, it is a different society, okay? But I do shows, and the shows are seen around the world. But Jersey, the market hasn't been there. The rents haven't gone up in 25 years.
Right. The suburban markets are where, you know, your peak is probably mid-30s, and not necessarily Brooklyn, but the suburban markets. And when the market tanks, you're talking about mid-20s, but your concessions are always high. And you're just capped at how far you can push. And with the city, you know, sky really is the limit on where you can push depending on, you know, how hot the market gets. And in a down market, people will always come back to New York City first because they do want to be here. People get pushed to the outer boroughs because they might not be able to afford it. But everybody really wants to be here because, as you said, it's the best city in the world.
So I'll think in a sort of a tunnel for a second, and you say, where does the next opportunity lie? Maybe we're, you know, for us, we're patient. The market is at all-time highs, at least for land trades.
45 years, the site where Essex is going in Lower Manhattan, in Ludlow, in that neighborhood, nobody wanted it. Okay, it was parking lots. Okay, you know, it's a vision. No one really expected the Lower East Side to evolve to such a market. Nobody believed that the Bowery would be such a market today. You know, it's a hard situation, you know, but Queens has certain markets, okay? Queens, the office market, must has some good buildings because they're near the transportation. So I think transportation is very important. That's something that's a big key in everything.
And I think RXR in Long Island City, we looked at a deal on Northern Boulevard, the Standard Motors building. I think they made a good buy there because, again, that's a cheaper alternative to Manhattan. It sits on, you know, great access to public transportation, and there's a whole residential rezoning. They're going to build something like 10,000 units there.
A number of years ago when I had the Oganians on my show, and this is before they built their first property in Long Island City, I said, you've owned the property for years. Why didn't you go there? It was gritty. It wasn't there. Today, Long Island City
It's incredible.
is
Look
incredible.
across the East River.
I mean, it's
unbelievable.
you know, I walk a lot, and you know,
Yeah.
I just went over there. So I think what it comes out to, the real estate market is a good market. It's a great opportunity for young people. It's a place that you can grow, and I'm happy that Andrew has assembled, since you are the executive producer today of the show, bringing.
I bet I get a credit.
You get a
right?
credit. I gave you the credit right now. I'd like to thank Steve, Spencer, Andrew, and Michael, and I'll see you next week.